Hello, my name is Clayton, and today I want to investigate if the return of grazing and the associated infrastructure would have a negative effect on recreational experiences at Penitente Canyon Special Recreation Management Area, or SRMA. Penitente Canyon SRMA is a 3,600 acre area managed by the Bureau of Land Management, or the BLM. There are over 300 sport climbing routes, a 17-mile stacked loop trail system, and a 15-site campground. Grazing has not been active at Penitente Canyon for over 17 years. The permit could have and technically should have been withdrawn by management after 3 years of consecutive non-use. However, somehow this permit has remained valid, and now the permittee has requested to use the allotment. The development of the campground and trail system occurred when the threat of damage from cattle did not exist. A major concern is that the livestock, water developments, and fencing would change the wildland setting and could have a negative effect on recreational experiences. Imagine a biker really feeling the flow as they race down the path, just to come around the corner and be met by a 1,000-pound bovine chewing on their cud. Or how about after finishing a grueling uphill climb, being greeted by the view of a water tank instead of an unmarred landscape? Better yet, envision being splashed by fecal matter after hitting a fresh cow pie. With these changes to the setting, the recreation experience could be negatively impacted for the majority of users. Another concern is the damage that the cattle could cause to the biking and hiking trail system that has recently been developed. The bulk of the trail system has been developed over the last 2 years when the threat of damage from livestock did not exist. The trail system has taken hundreds of hours of planning and design, as well as tens of thousands of dollars to construct. According to a study by the East Bay Regional Park District, when a trail is badly damaged, there are multiple consequences. People stop using the area and go elsewhere, increased erosion occurs, and maintenance costs are amplified. If the trails are in disrepair because of cattle traveling on them, this could lead to a negative recreation experience. New pasture fences that are proposed would intersect the trail system in several spots, leading to a possible safety issue. Besides being a safety issue, the interruptions in the trail breaks up the flow and fill, changing the setting and therefore altering the experience. So why, after 17 years of non-use, is the permittee requesting the use of this allotment? I believe it is because the San Luis Valley region has been suffering from a drought that has lingered for over a decade. This drought has caused the price of hay to skyrocket. With hay being so expensive, ranchers are looking for any and all options to graze their stock, including low-quality allotments with very little infrastructure, such as Penitente Canyon. There are currently no water developments on the allotment, and there is very little fencing. When the allotment was active, it was used for sheep grazing. The permit holder would haul water to his stock, and also, since it was a sheep allotment, there was always a herder with the stock, hence the lack of fencing. The current permit holder is proposing to install a bunch of developments, including a solar panel powered well, a 24,000-gallon storage container, pipeline, numerous water tanks, and several miles of fence. This infrastructure will change the setting. This really boils down to a classic multiple-use conflict issue for management. In a designated SRMA, recreation takes priority over any other resource, such as range, timber, or minerals. It cannot be forgotten that the BLM is a multi-use agency, and the majority of the land in this field office is used for grazing. In deciding whether or not to allow the return of cattle grazing to Penitente Canyon, it is very useful to analyze similar issues and opinions concerning the management of livestock grazing within other special recreation areas. The Little Snake Field Office addressed the subject of grazing in SRMAs in their 1986 Resource Management Plan, also known as an RMP. Quote, "The area would remain open to livestock grazing except within developed or intensely used recreation sites and projects designed to benefit recreation and visual resource management objectives." The Little Snake Field Office's approach to mitigate any of the possible negative effects associated with grazing on recreation and visual resources are encouraging for recreation users and planners. This seems like a very reasonable management strategy. It still allows for grazing, but protects recreation. If grazing returns to Penitente Canyon, The San Luis Valley Field Office should look to this RMP as an example to place mitigation measures in order to provide protection for recreation and visual resources. Taking preventative measures such as these can help curtail negative experiences. Gra evaluates recreational use and conflicts in her article, Conflicts on the Range, the Management of Multiple Uses on Rangelands. Gra points out that there has been a huge population increase, a large increase in leisure time availability, and more disposable income over the past 2 decades. One consequence is the heavy recreational use of rangelands that may have previously seen very little, if any, other use than livestock grazing. This is a very important point to make. This range versus recreation conflict is relatively new. And it is also pointed out that anytime several people with different goals meet on the same landscape, conflicts can occur. However, Gra does write about a study performed in Colorado which revealed that 34% of campers thought that the presence of livestock improved their stay. Another study is referenced that indicates that perception depends on recreation users, livestock knowledge, and exposure to ranching. But if livestock are kept away from campsites and are riparian areas used for fishing, there's little objection to them. In looking through other policies, the Wilderness Act states that the grazing of livestock were established prior to the effective date of this act shall be permitted to continue subject to such reasonable regulations are deemed necessary by the Secretary of Agriculture. This is very clear language allowing for livestock grazing in specially designated areas. In the issue of the reappearance of grazing at Penitente Canyon, it is clear that even under the strictest management, grazing can be permitted. In the evaluations of opinions, it is crucial to understand even extreme views. Andy Kerr starts his article by informing the reader, domestic livestock grazing in the National Wilderness Preservation System is, in all cases, inimical to the wilderness concept. Nevertheless, it is allowed. This article addresses Kerr's theories of grazing and why it is allowed on wilderness. The author gives 4 reasons why he believes grazing is allowed in wilderness areas. The first is history. Grazing occurred before any special land designations. The second is political power. Many cattle and sheep barons held political office or had major influence over politicians. The third reason is an unknown public. People are not used to seeing an ungrazed landscape. And the fourth reason he points out is the unknowing conservation movement, apathy, and other priorities. And he is quoted as saying, conservationists have chosen to ignore livestock grazing chronic damage to instead address what are perceived to be more acute threats to biodiversity. Efforts against logging, road building, mining, and development are higher priorities to most conservationists than livestock grazing. It is quite clear from this article that some people are very opposed to grazing in wilderness areas and possibly anti-grazing in general. To users like Kerr, any livestock encounter anywhere would constitute a negative experience. The opinions of people who actually work in the field, deal with conflicts, and hear complaints firsthand are also valuable. In Sandoval's article, he points out that a lot of user conflict between recreation and range operations occurs simply due to timing. He also offers a quite simple solution to avoid the conflict. Before making a recreational trip to public lands, it would be a good idea to call the Public Land Center to determine if there would be livestock at the location and time you plan to make a visit. Simply knowing the schedules of when livestock are supposed to be in certain areas and possibly rearranging some excursions can drastically alleviate some conflicts. Cows, conflict, and communication, a case study in southern Colorado. This was written by researchers from Colorado State University. This study analyzes visitor perceptions about public land grazing on the Big Cimarron drainage. This was an on-site, self-administered survey distributed over 5 months while 600 head of cattle grazed in the Big Cimarron allotment. Of the people surveyed, 82% encountered livestock on their visit. 18% had a negative initial reaction. 38% had a positive initial reaction, and 44% were confused, undecided, or neutral. When probed about grazing in general, 26% thought that grazing on public land is acceptable with current policies. 15% felt that grazing was not an acceptable use of public lands, 19% needed more information in order to make a fair judgment, and 40% thought that grazing would be acceptable with improved management. Even though the initial reactions to grazing at Big Cimarron were not significantly negative, many users are undecided on the issue and would like more information about grazing. The results from this case study slightly surprised me. Many more people had positive reaction to the cattle than what I would have guessed. Managers of the San Luis Valley Field Office must make a decision on whether or not to allow grazing at Penitente Canyon. To recap, the primary issue surrounding Penitente Canyon SRMA is the returning of grazing to the area. Grazing has not been active in the area for over 17 years, and a major recreation site, including a campground and trail system, has been developed in the absence of grazing. The previous permit holder used the area as sheep pastures. The current permit holder would like to use the allotment for cattle use. If cattle grazing and the associated infrastructure allowed at Penitente Canyon, recreational experiences may be negatively impacted. Here are 5 options that address the principal issue at hand which management could take. Option 1. Allow permit holder to graze cattle on the SRMA with no restrictions within the area. The pros to this would definitely benefit the permit holder. He would be able to fully utilize the allotment and get inexpensive grazing. The cons would affect the recreation area users. The feel of the area would be different with the addition of the infrastructure needed to support cattle grazing. Option 2. Allow grazing to return to the general area but restrict areas of use. The pro to this option is that the permit holder would be able to utilize at least a portion of the allotment. Another pro is that by limiting where the cattle and necessary infrastructure were allowed, the recreation users would maintain the setting to this great site. The cons would be that the permit holder would not get full utilization of the allotment. Also, this decision would thwart any expansion of recreation opportunities in surrounding areas. The third option would be to allow grazing to return with seasonal restrictions. The pros for this decision would be that the cattle operator would still be allowed to receive some benefits of grazing the area. Another pro would be that by timing grazing during historically low recreating time, the majority of recreation users would not actually witness cattle at the site. The cons would be that the infrastructure needed to support the cattle would be on site all year and would still affect the feel of the area. Option 4. Allow the return of grazing, but only allow a sheep permit instead of a cattle permit. The pros to this idea would be that the permit holder would still be able to utilize the allotment. By allowing sheep instead of cattle, much less infrastructure such as fencing and water developments would have to be developed. And a sheep herder could keep the stock away from heavily used recreation areas, and we wouldn't need any fencing. The cons would be that there would have to be some sort of permit transfer with the sheep operator, as could be quite timely and difficult. Another con would be that there would still be some impacts on the setting from the sheep. Option 5. Do not allow grazing of any kind. Permanently remove the permit. The pros to this possibility would be that the recreation setting would remain intact and there would be the option of expanding opportunities. The cons to this decision would be that the permit holder would not be able to use the area for grazing and would have to find alternative feeding areas for their livestock. There is definitely a need to balance recreation opportunities and grazing at Penitente Canyon. The Bureau of Land Management is a multiple use agency, and all resources and reasonable uses must be considered. My recommendation is to choose a combination of management options number 2 and number 3. By using management option number 2, the rancher will be able to graze within the SRMA boundary, but will be restricted from entering the campground, rock climbing area, and the majority of the trail system. This is a good option because it pleases both interested parties. The rancher still gets use of the range, and recreationists can still enjoy most of the area, free of bovine and infrastructure. Implementing option 3 will alleviate some user conflict by limiting when the cattle are present. Most of the recreation use at Penitente Canyon occurs during the shoulder seasons. If grazing is to occur, it should happen when the recreation use is at the lowest volume of the year. Also, if grazing occurs during winter, the frozen ground will help alleviate any damage caused to the trail system by cows. This combination of options would work better than the three alternative management options because all interested parties should consider the decision fair. While writing this paper, a thought came to me. The fact that I grew up on a rural cattle ranch is probably why I didn't think of this before. As urban areas continue to swell, there will be more and more people who have never seen a cow in person. For this growing demographic, they may actually like to see cows on their recreational expeditions to Penitente Canyon. Thank you for your time today, and have a great day.